Well, hey there, it is Cindy, and thank you for joining us. I always appreciate when you choose to spend your valuable time with us here, and we always hope and strive to give you the best possible value. And I'm so glad you're here and can't wait for you to hear today's episode. But just before we dive in, want to share some ways that we can work together. If you happen to be looking to up level your negotiation skills so you can negotiate a better life, I've got everything from online to group to my signature VIP mastermind experiences to help you better leverage your innate power. And yes, you have it already to get more of what you want and deserve in life. And if that sounds interesting, check it out at artoffemininenegotiation.com. And now the reason you are here on to today's program, I am so happy and excited to introduce you to Rachel Hanfling today. We're going to be talking about how to negotiate increased visibility through improved communication. So welcome, Rachel. I am so excited about this conversation.
I'm so excited about this conversation too. Thank you for having me.
And for those of you out there, if you don't happen to know about Rachel, she is an Emmy-nominated guide to clear, confident, charismatic speech. She is a former producer to none other than the infamous Oprah and on Anderson Cooper as well. And she's coached clients to become go-to media experts, to dominate worldwide speeches, to land deals on Shark Tank, sell out on QVC, to generate explosive sales for themselves, and to nail those workplace politics, which so many of us miss the mark on, and many, many more. She has taught at Harvard, she's taught internationally, and certainly across the US extensively. And she's the creator of Own the Power of Your Story. So we are really lucky to have her here today. I'm going to try and pick her brain as much as possible for you. So Rachel, why don't you start by telling us, how did you come to this line of work? Most people, these would be their dream jobs. How did you get there?
It's interesting. I'll tell you, it started when I was a child. I I grew up as a kid that was pretty shy, and I did really well with adults, but I struggled with kids my own age. And I remember every year before school would begin in elementary school, I would just be lying in my bed at night after everybody went to sleep. And I'd just be hoping and I'd be praying that this would be the year
Uh-huh.
that I would develop a circle of friends. And every year it was the same. I was just looking in. I was on the outside looking in, and it felt like I just couldn't penetrate the group. And it was really painful. And it's funny, I have told this story hundreds of times now. And every time I tell it, I feel like
Yeah.
I'm that little girl
Yeah.
again. That
Yeah.
little girl did not have anybody paying attention to her, but she started paying attention to the other kids at school. And looking back on it, it was strategic, but it wasn't intentional in that way at the time. I just wanted to know how these other kids got kids to want to be friends with them.
Yeah.
So I observed what they said and what they didn't say, and their body language and their facial expressions, how they drew people closer to
Yeah.
them. And then I did a second thing. My mom and I, every night, as we'd wait for my dad to come home from work, we'd watch the evening news. And I got on some kind of a visceral level that they were trying to do the same thing for millions of people that I was trying to do with small groups.
Yeah.
They were trying to get people interested, choose them, you
Yeah.
know, and then keep them coming.
Yeah.
By the time I got to high school, I did develop a circle of friends. I taught myself how to do that. And when it came time to choose a career, I chose a career that had been my teacher all along, and
Yeah.
that was television.
I love that story. And when you say every time you tell that, you feel it, I felt that, Rachel. And first, let me
Thank
thank you
you.
for being so vulnerable and transparent with our audience, because I think we all have pieces of that. Gosh, I remember going from grade 6 to grade 7, we were going to go to middle school and lying there, as you said, going, I'm going to meet all new people. I can reinvent myself, right? But I hadn't been ahead of the curve like you were to be observing everybody. So talk to us a bit about, why is visibility important? Like, what are some of the benefits of letting yourself get to a place where you can be a little more visible?
Well, if people don't know about you, you can't help them. You can't have an impact on them. You
Yeah.
can't sell to them whatever outcome it is you are trying to achieve. You can't do that if
Yeah.
people don't know about you. Also, I believe that we all want to be connected on a deep level
Yeah.
to other people. And some people feel that need more than others.
Yeah.
But certainly, if you want to achieve something, you need people to know about you.
Yeah. Yeah. So simple in so many ways. So what do you think stops people, both, I mean, people generally, but I would say women in particular, from stepping into the fullness of their visibility?
Okay, there are a lot of reasons. For some people, it's more they don't know what to say, how to say it, how to show up, how to start conversations, how to make themselves be interesting and engaging and attract people to them. That's the sort of technical part of what I do. For other people, and sometimes it's really both. For other people, it is a deep fear
Yeah.
of putting themselves out there.
Yeah.
And that can look like a lot of different things. I'm scared to speak. Like I literally have a bodily reaction to getting up in front of people. I had a client that when she first started working with me, she was literally having back spasms if somebody even called on her in a group.
Yeah.
And then a year later, after working with me, she was leading groups and getting
Yeah.
paid to lead groups. But even being visible just that little bit to answer a question in a group was hard for her. So that's the case for some people. For some people, it's more like, why would anybody care what I have to say? Does what I have to say even matter? I'm afraid of being judged. There are many permutations of what I call the same bucket of people not choosing to put themselves out there. And what I think is really sad about that, and what makes me want to help those people even more, is they have so much to give.
Yeah.
And they could be giving so much to their audience.
Absolutely.
And they're not putting themselves out there because they're not comfortable.
Yeah. And what a shame that is. I mean, when you think of the people who could have such an impact, and ironically, I
Uh-huh.
think sometimes people who have the capacity to have the most impact are whether they're introverted or, as you say, have those debilitating fears that hold them back. And what a loss, not only for them, but for the world.
100%, because you don't know who you could be influencing when you own the power of your voice
Yeah.
and you are out there talking. I couldn't agree more.
Now, when we talk about some of these fears that hold people back, I often say negotiating our mindset is our first and most important negotiation. So, do you have any tips for our listeners on there for how they can negotiate those mindsets to help them step more into the light?
Well, I love the way you're framing negotiation with your mind first. There are many ways that I will help people get over a fear of putting themselves out there. It's not a one size
Of
fits
course.
all solution for most people. That said, where I start is when people are nervous for whatever reason about putting themselves out there, they are trapped in their own head and in their own heart.
Yeah.
They are thinking about themselves
Yeah.
and all their fears about what might not go well. When we flip that script and we start to think about our audience, and our audience could be one person or it could
Yeah.
be billions of people. When we flip that script and start thinking about our audience, what does our audience need? What do they want? What do they care about? What don't they even know they care about? And how you can deliver to your audience the most wonderful gift. And actually think of it like a gift. How
Yeah.
can I gift my audience exactly what would serve them the best?
Yeah.
Then you get out of your own head and your own heart where you're so stuck with all these bad feelings that are
Yeah.
stopping you, and you get into the frame of mind where you want to give And that also happens to be the frame of mind where you're going to be the most successful
Yeah.
with your audience.
What a beautiful reframe. I love that. That's so simple, right? And who am I to deny them the gift that I have here to
Uh-huh.
be able to impart? That's gorgeous.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's coming from your heart. It's coming
Yeah.
from a genuine place. And and it really works.
Yeah, coming from a place of service takes some of the
Yes.
pressure off, right? It's not a performance, it's a service. I love that reframe, Rachel. That's beautiful. So
Yeah.
let's talk about the importance of listening in our communication. I just find like in North America, we do not listen well. We pay lip service to listening, but I think we're a culture that has not been trained well. So what are your thoughts on listening and whether it's important in our communications?
I think listening is very important. In fact, I know you're not surprised to hear that, right? Okay. In fact, when I'm teaching people how to talk for whatever it is they want to achieve, whether it's a media appearance on
Yeah.
stage, in a boardroom, an interview, wherever it is, when I'm teaching people how to talk, the place I always start is with their audience. Who's your audience? What do they care about? In fact, before I got on this
Yeah,
podcast
I
with
was just
you,
thinking
I
that.
said, who's your audience? Because I want to be able to think about who's listening
Yeah,
before I talk to you.
nice.
And so when you are getting in front of an audience, you want to be listening and observing and researching as much as you possibly can
Yeah.
so that you can give them exactly what they want to move forward together. That isn't what people usually think of as listening, but I feel like it all falls under the
Yeah.
bucket of
Yeah.
listening.
I love
How
that.
do you define listening?
Yeah. Well, and I just want to put a pin for our listener. It's a beautiful sort of different perspective on that, right? When we talk about listening, paying attention to who we're speaking to and what they want. You know, one of my models, I call it the 5W: who, what, where, when, why.
Mhm.
And I hadn't thought of it in that context before, Rachel, but it kind of applies, right? When you're going to be speaking, who do you want to show up as? But more importantly, who are they, right? What are they hoping to get out of this? And what is their deep why? So that you can
Mhm.
surrender your quit making it about me and make it about them. I think that's beautiful. And because for me, I always think of the traditional to answer your question. Like when we talk about listening, it's about truly putting yourself in the shoes of the other person, right? Not waiting your turn to speak, not processing 3 steps ahead, but being absolutely present in the moment and coming from a place of total curiosity and asking questions to keep that conversation going, to let the other person be fully seen and heard. And it's rare that I see it, certainly in litigation, as you can imagine, in the practice of law. Like that is rare. When we most need it, we least seem to use it. So
I think
important.
you're saying very much the same thing, but using different
Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
And when I talk to people about listening, I talk about the actual words that are coming out of someone's mouth
Yeah.
and also listening below the surface
Yes.
and listening for what they're not saying. And also, and I know sometimes people might feel this sounds a little woo woo, but listening to their energy
Yeah.
and what is emanating from them that maybe isn't coming out in words, but you can feel in them, and then you can target and address.
Oh, that is such great advice. And I don't think that's woo woo at all. And it's interesting. We talk so much about woo woo, but a lot of the stuff coming back from the 60s when you think they were all characterized as hippies and that. And now the science is catching up to support that, you know what? They were way ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Way ahead of the
There
curve.
is a lot that people are saying that has nothing to do with their words or their body language or
Yeah.
their voice. And if you learn, and I believe you can teach people this,
Yeah.
if you learn people to, if you learn how to tune into
Yeah.
the energy somebody's putting
Yeah.
out, then you're going to be more successful in navigating whatever it is you're going to do with
Oh,
them.
That is so important and rarely spoken about. So thank you for raising that. And even just in terms, not only the energies, which I think is beautifully characterized, but even tone of voice and pacing. Like,
Absolutely.
I tend to be a very kind of, dynamic personality. And I really pay attention now to catching if I'm speaking with somebody whose pace is slower
Mhm.
and it's obvious they need to more time to process. And frankly, it helped 2 out of 3 of my kids had, different learning styles, let's put it that way. And I had to really get more attuned to that. And it has been such a gift to me in business and beyond to be able to have better conversations with better outcomes by meeting somebody where they're at and making sure that they're comfortable with the flow of the conversation. So I think that's great advice. And how about voice on that? I know you do a lot of work with your clients around voice. What can we do to improve our voice, or what should we be paying attention to?
So the way there are people that just specialize in voice. That's not me. I
Yeah,
view voice as part of the whole package
yeah,
and help people address that alongside their words and alongside their body language. That said, when I listen to somebody's voice, I feel their energy. Like when I was producing television, if somebody I'd never spoken to left me a voicemail on my voicemail, I could learn a lot about them just from listening to them talk.
yeah,
And a lot of times people don't have an awareness of the way in which they speak that is not about the words they say, but just how they're saying them. They're saying them in a very flat way. It's monotone. They're not, they don't have an awareness of how they emphasize certain words. Like if you listen to me talk, I'm emphasizing the words I want to hit in a sentence to make my point. And you can teach people that.
yeah,
It involves rewiring the way they speak, and it doesn't happen overnight because they're so used to the way they do speak. But when they learn to do that, they're way more interesting to listen to. I
yeah,
mean, can you imagine going to a perform like a concert where
yeah,
someone just sang the same note the whole
yeah,
time? You wouldn't go to that performance.
yeah.
You want to go on a journey with the words, with your voice, with your body, everything it is that you put out into the
Yeah.
world.
And how hopeful that you're, and again, I hope our listeners are catching, you can learn this. So no need to panic if you're like, and so many people, I think it just are like, oh, I'm terrible at that. And we shut ourselves down and don't give ourselves the opportunity. And as you're saying that, Rachel, I was thinking I do some writing on the side. And, I had been a finalist in this writing contest, but it was called
Oh, yeah?
Writing Out Loud, where you had to then read your written work out loud and get judged on that. And they brought in a coach who had us mark up the script, literally exactly what you'd said, where I had never brought that level of intentionality to my speaking before. I always just let it kind of flow. But to really, it was a whole different experience to pay attention to where I wanted the emphasis on the words, where I wanted to drop my voice, where I wanted to increase.
Mhm.
It was a game changer in terms of presentation. And thanks for the reminder, because I probably have not been doing it again in a while. So that
You
was
have a
very,
beautiful melody to your voice.
well, thank you.
And and so I have I mean, I can't sing to save my life, but this isn't something you need to be able to sing to do. It has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
And I should actually also point out when to pause,
Yes.
when not to pause, and when to pause. And a
Yeah.
lot of people can be afraid of silence because silence is so unsettling
Yeah.
if you don't understand the strategy behind it.
Yeah.
Silence is actually a really good thing. It allows your audience to process what you're saying. It allows them to gear up for whatever it is you're going to say next.
Yeah.
I would imagine in a courtroom, you would
Yeah.
utilize that often.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you use that pot if you've just made a really important point. Allow the space to let it settle, right? And even when I'm going back to storytelling as well, so many people, if it's like they know they only have a certain amount of time to speak, they rush through the story. And people tend to tune out. It goes over your head, as opposed to those who read less. But boy, what an impact it has when they slow down. And I'm a fast talker, so that's something I have to really get intentional about. And you're so right, Rachel, slowing down that pacing, knowing when strategically to pause. And even just for our listeners on silence, even in your negotiations, generally, silence can be such a gift. You allow that silence, it leaves the room for the other person, for the other party to be able to fill some of those spaces. And that's where the gold is. Now, Rachel, you'd mentioned about body language before. And as you can see, for those who are watching, I use my hands a lot.
Me too.
Some people joke I should have been Italian. I don't know. But what are your thoughts on the subject of body language? How can we learn to be more effective, or what are some things we should at least pay attention to?
It's individual for everybody, and that's really my belief in training people overall. I never try to train somebody to be like somebody else. I'm trying to train each person to be the best of who they are. That said, there's certain things we all should do, like posture. If you're hunched over like this, I don't know if you're watching this podcast, you can see me hunching over. And sometimes it's not that dramatic. I'm just doing that for emphasis. But you want your shoulders back and you want them down. And just that alone can make such a big difference for so many people. Another mistake I see in body language commonly is if people are in front of a group, sometimes they are moving without purpose.
Yes.
If you're moving, that's great, but there should be a purpose associated with that move. You shouldn't be pacing like a caged tiger because that is not beneficial to your storytelling, to your connection to the audience. So those are two things that are coming to mind. There's so much more with body language, but those are two things that once you're aware of them, you can start working on. And also with the posture, just like your voice, you don't want to start working on that only when you're in front of an audience. You want to start working on your posture every day when you're walking around. Otherwise, you're really going to be unlikely to get the posture right when you are in a high stakes situation and you need to show up with better posture.
Yeah. Great points. And it's funny, we'll have to have you come back at some point to speak just about body language one time, maybe.
Fun.
Right. It could be an entire episode on just that. But when you talked about that hunching and that posture, immediately it came to, I normally am not on TikTok, but I happened to see a TikTok video of this young woman, and it showed her sort of walking, and just this everything about her exuded a complete and utter lack of confidence. But going the space of just walking across the room, she went from that person to suddenly just a different and oh my gosh, it was like total catwalk model, high-end model, like profound difference in how she showed up. And I just want to put a pin, because you gave those 2 points, both of which are rarely spoken about. And I'm really glad that you touched on them because they're so rarely talked about. Moving aimlessly. I didn't realize that was something I was guilty of, like doing presentations on stage. If I'm not behind a podium, I'll often historically would just sort of wander across the stage aimlessly. And I had somebody who was a speech expert point out and say, every time you move, just what you said, Rachel, it needs to be for a purpose. So if you're changing direction in your talk, then maybe you're going to move to over here if you want to draw their attention. If you keep coming back to a particular theme, go back to the same spot on the stage for that theme. And I'd never again been intentional about that. And it made a big difference in how it was received, right? And when I talk about that woman walking confidence, we've mentioned a couple of times, and certainly that's what came to mind from the video I saw. Confidence is pretty important in getting better outcomes. So do you have any tips on how to improve that confidence in your speaking and your visibility?
There's a lot to say about that. And I think it's twofold. I coach people so that they feel more confident, and then they feel more confident as they begin to see themselves be more successful.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure the same thing happens to you when you're coaching people.
Yeah.
So it's like, what comes first?
Yeah.
And so in terms of my belief about people, I believe anybody, and I really mean this, anybody can learn how to speak effectively. It is, yes, some people are born with more talent. Some people are born with less talent, just like anything else.
Yeah.
But anybody can learn how to be an effective speaker. And in fact, when you see someone out there, whether it's on TV or on social media or on stage or wherever it is, and you think they're really great and you think, oh, I couldn't ever be like that, that should be a reframe for you to think, oh, I could learn
Yes.
to do that. That person actually put in a lot of effort to learn how to be like that. They did not just wake up that way. You know, I have small kids. Well, not that small anymore. They're 7. And as soon as they learn something, they'll say, "Oh, that was so easy." And and I'm always trying to point out it only became easy once you figured it out and you
Yeah.
practice it and you practice it and you practice it and now you're really good at it. And so it's easy.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. You have such beautiful reframes. I love it. And that's, what do they call that? The confidence competence loop, right? Like as we put ourselves out there to try new things, we get a little more competent in it. And as we get a little more confident, that gives us more confidence to put ourselves out there again. It's kind of like this beautiful infinity loop that keeps going ever up and up and up as you put yourself out, try to learn new things, and then it becomes easier, increases your confidence.
You know, I'm so glad you brought me back to the second part of that because I didn't really address that. I see over and over again, once people see, like, oh, I did that. I didn't die. I actually got good feedback. Oh, maybe I helped somebody. Maybe I achieved, some part of my goal. Even if there's so much more to work on, they see how far they've
Yeah.
come. They're excited about it. And they want to do more because they realize how beneficial it is to
Yeah.
learn these skills.
Yeah.
So, yes, and it's super cool. I
Yeah.
think the first time we talked, I told you that I think of communication as like literally the greatest game on earth because you just make an incremental
Yeah.
improvement and look what you can get.
Yeah. And it is so worth the effort because
Uh-huh.
everything in life is about connection and relationship, which comes from communication. Now, I'd be remiss if I did not ask you, given your vast and very high profile sort of media exposure, media exposure can obviously help boost a business, boost a brand. Do you have any quick hot tips on how to get media exposure for any of our listeners out there who may be feeling like they're banging their head against a wall?
Okay. I mean, I've taught whole courses on this. There is a lot. However, I'll address a very common mistake I see people making when they're trying to get out there. They will craft a pitch and they will just blast this one pitch to however many places they're trying to reach.
Yeah.
And what I always say to people about that is in my 2 decades in television, I do not recall booking anybody based on a generic pitch
Yeah.
that was sent to me. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is you're not thinking about your audience.
Yeah.
Your audience, just because they might all be TV shows, all be radio shows, all be podcasts, all be whatever it is, it doesn't mean they want the same thing. It doesn't mean they need the same thing. They book people based on the same things. And when you treat pitching in a very generic way, not thinking about who's going to be processing it, you are unlikely to be successful.
Yeah. That's such good advice. Such good advice. I was just thinking to a publicity summit I went to. I think Steve Harrison runs one, and what you just said absolutely resonates with the message that the media kept giving over and over again is Don't send me some generic pitch. Wait, if it's Valentine's Day, send me something specific to our audience that would be relevant on Valentine's Day. And then I'm like, okay, I can use that, but not just some generic, for me, learn the art of feminine negotiation, unless I'm going to put it in context. That's not particularly helpful. Now,
Yeah.
I understand you have a gift for our audience, a 5-minute video on how to become confident, clear, and connected speaker. Tell us a bit about that, quick.
Oh, I would love to. Okay, so for anybody who's listening who's thinking, wow, I want to learn how to speak better too, go to rachelhandling.com/5 minutes. And I assume this will be on the podcast page, but I'll spell it just if you're listening. That's rachelhandling.com/5 minutes. And you'll find a 5-minute video about how you too can become more confident, more clear, more connected every time you speak. So important.
Fabulous. Well, I love that. And I encourage our listeners, take advantage. We will make sure to have that site in our show notes as well. So there's no excuse. When somebody offers you a gift, take advantage of the gift, especially on an issue like this, given that communication is at the core of everything. And I normally like to end, Rachel, by asking, what is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've ever had? Doesn't have to be on this issue, just something in your life that was an aha moment that made you show up differently, feel differently about something.
Okay, so I think this relates a lot to my philosophy in teaching, my philosophy in parenting, just how I show up in the world. It's not really about me. It's always about, or it's almost always about somebody else.
Yeah.
And so that means don't take things personally. And it also means when I'm putting things out there to constantly frame in what is going to make the biggest impact for them. So that's how I try to see the world, not taking things so personally and thinking about other people.
Oh, I love that, Rachel. And for our listeners, just let that settle for a moment, because imagine what a different world it would be if we all showed up with that approach in life, that don't make it about me, but how can I be of service, right? Trying getting curious about other people, both on the micro level in your individual relationships, and even at the macro global level. A lot of the conflict we see would be eradicated, I think, if people took that sip, if they had that same mindset shift that you did, Rachel. So where can people learn more about you other than getting the 5-minute gift that you've given? Where do you want them to go?
Okay, so my website is the best place to contact me, rachelhandling.com, rachelhandling.com. It's the curse of having a very hard to spell name. That's my website. And if you reach out to me, I will respond. I respond to everything. I will respond to it personally. So I'd love to hear from you.
That's beautiful. And Rachel, I cannot thank you enough. I've had you all over. I've probably taken, volumes worth of material and had you dancing all over the place. And you have shown up with such grace and given such great content to our listeners. So thank you so much for joining us and dropping all these beautiful gems today.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here. And I've loved this conversation. It's gone by like that.
I can't believe how quickly it's gone by. So I said, as we were going through, I'm thinking I'll have to have Rachel come back and talk about that. We'll have to do an episode on that. So if you're up for it, I'll definitely get you booked. And for our listeners, I have no doubt you got just tons of value from this episode. And as I say, we thank Rachel for being so gracious and really sharing concrete, usable tips that you can take away here. Now, I encourage you to follow up, to continue with that education and give the gift of sharing. Make sure to share this episode with other people who could benefit, which is frankly everybody, given that communication is your number one important skill out there. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done that already. And also feel free to join our Women on Purpose community on Facebook at Women on Purpose Community. And that is a wrap for this episode. Until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.